2019 was a very interesting year for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It was filled with many highs, yet many lows, like their starting quarterback, Jameis Winston, who threw for over 5,100 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 30 interceptions, in what was a make-or-break year for him. He was the main headline for the Bucs going into the 2020 offseason, and you guys know the story by now. The Buccaneers elected not to bring him back, ending the 5-year tenure for the #1 overall pick. It started what could possibly be considered the biggest offseason in franchise history. And while the quantity in moves may be pretty low for normal standards, the quality in the moves is tremendous. This is a review of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 2020 offseason. So let's start out with the biggest move of the 2020 offseason. After months of dilemma and drama of who their quarterback would be heading into the 2020 season, they somehow ended up bringing in 6-time Super Bowl champion, 4-time Super Bowl MVP, and whom many consider to be the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady. It was down to the Buccaneers and Chargers for the Brady sweepstakes, and in the end, Tampa won. It was definitely unexpected to say the least. Although yes, Brady is not the same quarterback he used to be, with a decline in his play over the last few years. He now has a supporting cast with the likes of Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Ronald Jones, O.J. Howard, and Cameron Brate. Wait a minute, I think I'm missing something. Oh yeah, that's right! The Buccaneers also traded for Rob Gronkowski, who recently came out of retirement to join his quarterback in Tampa. Well, honestly, I don't think the trade is the biggest thing ever for the Bucs. I do think that Gronk will be a really good addition to the team. I honestly feel like he'll be used primarily as a blocking tight end and more of a decoy to take some coverage off of Evans, Godwin, Howard, and Brate. Bruce Arians has come out and said that the Bucs will basically run the same offense as last year, but with more of Brady's influence so they can play to his strengths. If you recall, Jameis Winston had his best season last year in terms of deep ball accuracy. He took a lot of deep ball shots last year, and that is one thing Bruce Arians loves to do. While I think the perception of Brady can't throw the deep ball anymore is a little bit overblown, I would definitely expect that there won't be as many deep ball shots as last year. But I do think the Buccaneers will remain a top 5 offense in terms of yards and points due to the extreme amount of talent on offense and how they were able to produce last year. I expect both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin to have 1,000-yard seasons again. I also think that O.J. Howard will have a major bounce-back year if we ultimately decide to keep him. Brady loves to use his tight ends, and honestly, I think getting Tom Brady was the best possible situation for O.J. Howard. Ronald Jones will be the feature back this year, with Peyton Barber heading to Washington in free agency. He really started to hit his stride towards the end of the season with getting more carries and eventually earning the starting job outright, and that was really good for him, especially after his horrible rookie campaign in which he totaled just 44 rushing yards on 23 carries. The Buccaneers also have Dare Ogunbowale, who is a really good receiving back and a core contributor on special teams. They also drafted Keyshawn Vaughn out of Vanderbilt this year. He'll most likely start off as a developmental player while Jones and Ogunbowale see the field. I like the running back core this year, and honestly, I think this could be Ronald Jones' breakout season. It also helps that the Buccaneers finally addressed the offensive line in the draft by drafting Tristan Wirfs out of Iowa with the 13th overall pick, trading up one spot to do so with the 49ers. The only concern I have at offensive line is Donovan Smith, who has had a majorly inconsistent 5-year career. I personally think he would do way better at right tackle instead of left, because I personally don't think he's a good blindside blocker. The Buccaneers gave him a 3-year, $41 million deal in 2019, so they obviously see something in him. We'll see how he does in 2020, but other than that, I think the Bucs have a really good offensive line with Ali Marpet, Ryan Jensen, and a developing guard in Alex Kappa. They definitely have the best hair out of every offensive line in the league, and that's a fact. Going back to the skill position players, and to be completely honest, I see them all having very even production. I don't see Mike Evans having 1,500 yards, and Chris Godwin has 800, and then everyone else is below that. I think we'll see a very even amount of production this year from all the Bucs weapons. I don't think we'll see a dip in production at all from the Buccaneers offense in 2020 compared to 2019. It'll just be ran slightly different because we have a different type of quarterback now. But once again, I do expect the Buccaneers to have a really successful offense in 2020. Now, when it comes to the defense, it was a completely different story in 2019. It was a very young but talented defensive unit. Let's start out with the NFL's league leader in sacks, Shaquille Barrett, who came out of absolutely nowhere in 2019, setting a new single-season franchise record with 19.5 sacks, breaking Warren Sapp's previous record. He was a complete monster in 2019 and will look to repeat the success in 2020, in which he'll be playing under the franchise tag as the Bucs look to extend him to a long-term deal. On the opposite side, Jason Pierre-Paul also also had a really good season with 8.5 sacks. Oh, and might I add, he basically missed the first half of the season due to a car accident that happened on May 2nd, 2019. He managed to earn himself a 2-year, $27 million extension. In the middle of those two is Ndamukong Suh, who had a pretty good 2019 campaign replacing the longtime Buccaneer fan favorite Gerald McCoy, who played for Carolina in 2019 and is now playing for Dallas this year. Suh managed 41 combined tackles and 2.5 sacks and had 2 defensive touchdowns himself. He received a 1-year extension and will look to build off his play he had in 2019. At nose tackle, there's a young up-and-coming stud known as, let's call him Vita Vea, who was a first-round pick for the Buccaneers back in 2018. Last year, he didn't start off too well, but as the season went on, his play got better, managing 35 tackles and 2.5 sacks. And also caught a touchdown on offense. Who doesn't love big man touchdowns? There's also William Golston, Raheem Nunez-Roches, and Anthony Nelson, who will serve as good depth and rotational pieces on the defensive line. All these guys managed to make up the #1 rushing defense in the entire NFL last year. They managed to only give up 73 rushing yards a game, and it's not like they faced no-name running backs all year. They had to face the likes of the Niners running back committee, Christian McCaffrey twice, Todd Gurley, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, Leonard Fournette, Chris Carson, and Saquon. That's not an easy task. And I haven't even gotten into the linebacker core made up of Levante David, who has been one of the best linebackers and most underrated players in the entire league over his NFL career. And let's also talk about the #5 overall pick in last year's draft, Devin White, who had a fantastic rookie campaign. In 11 games last year, he managed 58 tackles, 3 forced fumbles, an interception, and he also had 2 fumble recoveries for touchdowns. Tight ends need to watch out because this linebacker duo could be very scary in 2020. Now let's get on to the secondary, who is probably the most interesting group of the entire team. This is a very young unit consisting of Carlton Davis and MJ Stewart, who were mid-round picks in 2018, Jamel Dean and Sean Murphy-Bunting, who were second-round picks in 2019. This also includes safeties Mike Edwards, a mid-round pick in last year's draft, and Jordan Whitehead, a late-round pick in 2018. So as you could probably tell, this is a very young unit. Last year, they had a lot of growing moments, including being dead last in yards allowed for the first half of the season. Anyone could have thrown for 300 plus against this team in the first half of the season. But after Week 10 against Arizona, something changed. The following Monday after the game, Bruce Arians made a bold statement to the team by releasing former first-round pick Vernon Hargreaves, who honestly had a pretty bad tenure in Tampa, plagued by injuries and tons of inconsistency, was also being constantly changed from outside corner to nickel, and that just didn't help. After the release of Hargreaves, the play of the secondary and just the defense overall improved tremendously. In the first 8 games of the season, they gave up 28.8 points per game. In the final 8 games of the season, they only gave up 21.6 points per game, which is a tremendous improvement. The biggest question for the defense heading into 2020 is, can they continue that play they had in the latter half of the season? That remains to be seen. They also addressed the defense in the draft by drafting Antoine Whitfield in the second round, whose father actually played against Brady in the early part of his career, who probably won't be starting in the early part of the season, but can definitely work his way into the rotation. They also drafted a defensive tackle out of Nebraska, Khalil Davis, and linebacker Chappelle Russell out of Temple. Both of these guys could serve as good depth pieces at those respective positions. Overall, I remain cautiously optimistic that the defense can continue that great play into 2020, but again, it remains to be seen. The Bucs haven't had a truly great defense in years, and I'm talking all the way back to their Super Bowl days back in 2002. We will see how they perform this year. Now, as a little bonus segment, I'm going to quickly go over the special teams unit because they were a very important part of last year's team too. Let's start with kicker Matt Gay. Gay was a 5th-round pick out of Utah in 2019 and went 27 for 35 on field goal attempts and went 43 for 48 on extra points. Now, I'm not exaggerating when I say that that was probably the best season by a Bucs kicker in a very, very long time. The Bucs have had consistent kicking woes ever since Matt Bryant left for Atlanta. The most infamous of all of them, ironically the last time the Buccaneers only had one kicker per a full season, was Roberto Aguayo, the 2nd-round pick out of Florida State who was cut only 1 year later after the Bucs traded up to draft him. But going back to Matt Gay, he was inconsistent at times and honestly ended the season on a sour note against the Falcons, in which he went 0 for 3 on field goals in that 28-22 loss in overtime, where Jameis Winston would ultimately throw his final pass as a Buccaneer, which, just like his first, was a pick six. I still get triggering flashbacks from that moment. Anyways, I think Gay will have a really good bounce back 2020 campaign and will definitely bounce back from that performance at the end of the season. At punter, we have Bradley Pinion. In 2019, he averaged 43.2 yards per punt and down 19 inside the 20. I'd say that's a decent season, but I'd like to see just a little bit more heading into 2020. Not more of him, more yards per punt. Again, there's always room for improvement. Now, every team also has a special teams ace. For example, the New England Patriots have Matthew Slater, who is honestly considered to be one of the best special teams players in NFL history. For the Bucs, we have Ryan Smith, who has played excellent on special teams his entire career and is really good at downing punts too. Overall, while this unit isn't too strong, I definitely think all of them can improve this season. Now, after all of this, what is my final record prediction for the 2020 season? Best case scenario, Tom Brady proves that he's still got the arm talent he's always had. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, O.J. Howard, Gronk, Ronald Jones all put together really strong seasons. The defense builds off of its strong play towards the end of the season, and the Bucs go 13-3. Worst case scenario, Tom Brady is completely washed. Bucs fans will be wishing Jameis Winston was still under center. The O-line plays like shit. The defense totally collapses, and the Bucs end up going 7-9 for the second year in a row. For my final record prediction, I think the Buccaneers will finally end that 12-year playoff drought, going all the way back to 2007, and will go 11-5 and get a wild card spot, because I still have New Orleans winning the division. This team could get so unpredictable in 2020, but it's all about the results on the field. But the moral of the story is, buy into the hype, don't go too crazy, otherwise we're going to end up like the Browns did last year.